It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. God, it's Feedback Friday. And I'm recording this Feedback Friday before Wellness Wednesday goes live. So there won't be any Wellness Wednesday content on this Feedback Friday. I'm just trying to preserve energy, preserve spoons this week because I thought having the week before the holidays was going to be enough. It wasn't. It sort of started on the weekend, so I was overextended by Tuesday. So we'll go with it. I still haven't figured out what I want to do with year-end content yet. I may do nothing. I don't know. Interested in your guys' feedback. You know what's coming. Help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/LeannaK. I think I am going to still do Twitch on the Tuesday between Christmas and New Year's, just because that's fun. It's just playing a video game. Other than that, I may do stuff around the house. There are a few, like, home improvement projects that it's going to take the whole day because of the mess. And I just have not been able to do that. So I may, take the opportunity. I don't know. I haven't figured it out yet. That's not what we're talking about, though. There are plenty of comments without getting into Wellness Wednesday this week. And I'm going to start with two women talking the comments and then shift to Manly Monday. Because the comments were all over the place on Two Women Talking, but they were good, they were positive, and they added to the discussion, and it was just people expressing their opinions, and I want to reward that. So, yay. And so, Song and I talked about the fact that the comments were especially good this time around, so cool. So the first comment, and I put this first for no reason other than I came across it first, and it's like, yeah, this has been something I'm talking about a lot, but I don't think I've ever talked about this channel. The commenter said, I have to say I totally get the criticism of Tom King's writing, but it mostly works for me. I do think it's overly polarizing for the books he was put on, but it worked for me in a way that Scott Snyder's didn't and still doesn't. And this is one of those things where, for me, it's more frustrating when I see that someone's a good writer and they get sucked into the culture war, arguing with people and it becoming a cause instead of just telling a story. And I do think Tom King is a good writer and he can do... somebody on Nerdette stream says Tom King is one of those writers where you really want the whole Elseworlds format to come back because he would excel in that kind of what if deal. I know what if's Marvel, but I really miss the DC Elseworlds concept. I thought a lot of really good stories came out of it. And I think Tom King's got ability, and I agree, out of the modern writers, he's the one that I think I see what he's doing the most. Now, I do not connect to modern comics. I keep trying, and they seem extremely cynical and staged and pedantic and about telling stories about... It's going to sound weird with superhero comics, but telling stories about what should be instead of what is. And by that, I mean, they create these ideal things, ideal actions to the detriment of the character, right? They're making perfect be the enemy of the good. And I do, and it's tough, right? There's this trap that writers get into. I had to pull myself back from the brink of it. Because I ended up in comedy, right? I'm not ever going to be a serious, dramatic person. My boobs were too big for drama. No, it's true. If your boobs are over a certain size, you don't get any work as a dramatic actress. None. Christina Ricci got a reduction for that reason. And I didn't want to go that route. So, okay. Comedy, right? But you really get tired of people not seeing what you're doing. And you get tired of what you're doing dismissed as crap and ego. And so you make the mistake of trying to do things that are relevant or things that are conscious, instead of just telling a story. And so I have a particular reaction when somebody who can tell good stories ends up getting up on a soapbox. And I'm all for fighting for causes, but when you have the opportunity to tell a story is always more powerful than a political speech, right? And I'll just leave that there as adding to the conversation, right? And I do think Tom King has talent. Another comment. I think those that put too much of themselves into a project or treat it like a substitute for therapy are less likely to take any negative criticism well, especially if they're looking for validation. This is amplified when someone takes something that's been done and makes changes that doesn't work. The Tomb Raider reboot comes to mind for me, or even just repeats the same thing with a not so fresh coat of paint. Terminator Dark Fate comes to mind for me. As for the perpetual victimhood mentality, it's far too easy to slip into that hole, not so easy to dig out of it. Though I will say it's worth doing so, because that mindset does not bring long-term happiness. It even can more often than not fail to bring short-term validation. I don't get the war on masculinity and femininity. Should we all be mindless drones unable to express ourselves? James Cameron recently called testosterone toxic. I may be seeing what isn't there, but it sounds like saying women aren't allowed to be feminine. I can say that as a man. I do like romantic things. Though what one person finds romantic, another can see it differently. I had this discussion with my partner a few days ago that she sees 50 Shades of Grey as romantic with how protective Christian Grey is over Anastasia Steele. I think I spelled that right. I have no idea, commenter. I'll go with you. Though I said it seems more like he is possessive and manipulative in that regard. Song and I, we're going to tackle that topic somewhat in future Two Women Talking, so I will stick a pin in that one. I want to talk about the James Cameron stuff because that's been coming up a lot and I haven't talked about it. I always find that when directors get bitter and snipey, it's really revealing a lot about them and less about the topic that they're talking about. If James Cameron thinks testosterone is toxic, it's because he has a toxic relationship with masculinity, right? Hence the tie into the video about the real men do's and don'ts thing and how I'd love to make it more holistic as a discussion. And I mean, James Cameron has a spotty track record as a human being. I don't think one of the big achievements on Avatar: The Way of Water should be that Kate Winslet could hold her breath for 7 minutes and 15 seconds. When you're doing that, it's not a focus on the performance. And this is, I see these things and I'm like, why? And I do think that says something about the shit James Cameron was working out with Avatar. There seems to be an awful lot of ego on the Avatar sequel coming out of Cameron. Just the way he's, he tried to make Marvel movies the villain in his piece, but then identified Luke Skywalker as a Marvel character. And then, of course, this is the problem when you act like a jerk and your movie doesn't hit expectations. It's different, right? Than if you come in humble and it's like, I just hope people like it. It's out of my hands now. COVID, this, that, the next thing. If it doesn't meet expectations, then you get something like, Alita Battle Angel, where people are like, hey, that was a good movie. It was done dirty. I think James Cameron was involved in that too, but he was less of an asshole on the press tour, I think, or I just didn't see it. But when you throw bombs in press tours, you do antagonize the public. And it's tough, right? Because completely innocent comments can get twisted. But, calling Luke Skywalker a Marvel character is just, come on, man. You're a blockbuster director. Please know what universes the characters you're invoking are in. And I think there was so much hubris on the part of James Cameron with this whole project. The sheer amount of money it had to make, setting the bar so high. And then saying testosterone was toxic, considering the first Avatar was kind of an adapted white savior narrative. I don't want to step on that third rail, but it's not that I'm saying anything's bad or good. It's when you are in a glass house, don't throw stones, right? There was nothing brilliant about the story of the original Avatar movie. It was visual spectacle, right? And if you like the visual spectacle, that's cool. And if you got something out of the story, that's cool. It was just not a Kojima production where his stories are legit, original, and interesting and confounding, right? David Lynch tells stories that are interesting and confounding. You don't have to tell the best story in the world to make an enjoyable movie. And I'm going to take a point of privilege and aside on the hype, the pre-hype for the HBO Last of Us series, saying it's the greatest video game story ever told. No, it's not. It was well acted and really cool, realistic graphics. But The Last of Us is race-swapped Lee and Clementine from the Walking Dead Telltale game. Come fucking on. Like, there's nothing super original. I liked the first Last of Us game, but I will not die on the hill that it was an original story. And this is what pisses people off. It's this, don't piss in my ear and tell me it's raining. And, when people are going to see kind of a brainless popcorn movie, they still don't want their intelligence insulted. And I do think that it all ties into this expectations game and people not feeling like it's enough to just make something people like. They have to do something important. And I just think that's the kiss of death for a creative every single time. Doing something important and doing something meaningful is absolutely not the same thing. And it's good for your own sanity to know the difference. And that went all over the place, but that's two women talking. Now moving on to She-Ra. And some of the comments on that. One comment on that. Sorry, YouTube displays comments in a really, really weird way. Apologies if I stumble all over this. She-Ra is one of those shows that has interesting ideas, but the staff lack the experience and possibly even skill, but I'm not willing to go that far, not being a writer myself, to forge a fully cohesive story out of those ideas. Things like Steven Universe, OKKO, Let's Be Heroes, and God Even High Guardian Spice fall into that category, in my opinion. Also, they all have characters with legitimately interesting development that really should have been the leads, Pearl, Enid, and Snapdragon. The last one is especially odd since High Guardian Spice was made by a trans man and Snapdragon is at least gender questioning, if not a closet trans girl, but I digress. I could talk at length about the issues with Catra, Exadora, which would have been heavily mitigated if they hadn't fumbled Catra's redemption arc at the end. Or that for all the diverse body types, which was more down to the stylized designs in my opinion, the two main leads are the most traditionally feminine shaped, just saying. But my biggest issue is that it clearly wants to be something other than She-Ra because it assumes to know what that means and it's wrong. So it's straining against chains that aren't there and it just breaks its own back. Put simply, She-Ra and Princess of Power in trying to define something that never was, and in doing so fails to create the identity it wants to have. Thus, it just ends up being a mess. I thought that was a really intelligent comment. And I agree. There's a lot of components in the Netflix She-Ra that were like these entertaining, cool moments. And I like memes of ideas. But yeah, it didn't really coalesce under the central theme of what I believe She-Ra is about, which is, what's her tagline? The honor of Grayskull. That's always separated She-Ra from He-Man because He-Man was by the power of Grayskull. Okay, if He-Man's power is power and She-Ra's power is honor, then it should be a story about honor. And you could do that. But I think, I've talked about this before, that the Netflix shows just seem to have too many cooks and too many masters, and they're worried about that algorithm and the search and gaming it. And it's a business. I get it. Eggs get broken when you're making an omelet. And it seems like the whole development cycle at Netflix can be pretty toxic, just watching about, the nastiness coming out of people who worked on the Witcher series and, the way the knives came out for Henry Cavill recently. That just ain't cool. Unless someone is truly awful, people shouldn't be backstabbing. Because people notice who backstabs, right? But yeah, I do think, and we have to be careful, right? Because the original, you guys know I love He-Man, but it was silly, right? But it's one thing when you create an original thing and it's like, hey, we want to make a cartoon that sells a toy line and we got to do it for cheap. That's one thing. When you're remaking something, because it's a remake, you have to expand upon the original in some way, or else why bother remaking it? Why not just go back and watch the old ones, right? And that's what I think the She-Ra cartoon failed to do. And I think that the Netflix He-Man, the Kevin Smith He-Man, at least it attempted theme. There can be a debate about whether or not it achieved its goals, but you see it trying, at least in a way that I agree that the She-Ra cartoon was at war with itself. And how did the commenter put it? Straining against chains that aren't there. I really do agree with that. And Scorpia is MVP on Netflix She-Ra show. Catra, good. Agreed, though. Really fumbled the redemption arc. But Catra, Scorpia, MVP. One person said, hearing Song and Leanna talk about bras and makeup had me going, yep, those are words. I laughed. And makes me wonder if this is how other people feel when I prattle on about how Henry Cavill is doing a Warhammer 40K cinematic universe at Amazon. I will back you on this commenter. I am way more excited about the potential for Henry Cavill spearheading a Warhammer 40K project than I was about him coming back to Superman. And I know some people are really disappointed that he won't be reprising his role as Superman. But we've had so many Supermans, right? Lois and Clark is a Lois and Clark is a completely, is that right? No. Superman and Lois. Oh, fuck. That's the Dean Cain show, Lois and Clark. Superman and Lois. The one on CW right now. It's a perfectly good Superman show. I think they have the CW problem of plots that go on too long, but still really good characterizations. He's a good Superman. She's a good Lois. I dig them being parents. So we got that. But a Warhammer 40K verse could be huge and badass. And I am so excited by the possibility. Who knows if they'll get it across the finish line. But Cavill is a fan. He's obsessive about the things that he's a fan of. And Warhammer needs that obsessed sentiment, because if you try to Marvel Warhammer and use bathos as a crutch, you're not going to get the Warhammer experience. Warhammer has to be melodramatic badass. It has to just hang in the earnestness of its nihilism. And people are like, what is this? You can tell I've got very strong opinions about Warhammer 40K. And I think that if anybody can preserve the clarity of what Warhammer 40K is, he's the right guy to do it. So I'm just so stoked about that. Now we're going to move in to the Manly Monday about men and women. And I've got 3 comments here. Again, there were a lot of good ones, and I just picked ones that I thought, yeah. First comment, I had a counselor tell me to think of women as frightened deer. I told him, but that's me though. Yeah, I need women as frightened deer. That's a therapeutic clinical professional's advice to a client. Not women or people. Frightened deer. And you wonder why I do what I do. Because yes, I mean, that's the thing that advice doesn't do, right? Yeah, but that's me though. I'm frightened too. And this stuff is so counterintuitive. Like, if you're not afraid, you can't be brave. And we're just seeing some of that. We're seeing some of that in media now. But I had to give some support to that commenter of what it must have been like to have a counselor say that. Because don't treat women like frightened deer. Don't. That's an incredibly condescending point of view. I find more and more that I'm stunned by what I hear people endured in therapy. But support commenter, you're right. Not helpful. Another comment. This is something I've dealt with my entire life. My father was overly masculine, ex-military cop, bodybuilder. I was a budding artist and musician, in touch with both feminine and masculine dynamics in myself. I was kind and caring straight male after I figured out what I wanted. I was open to the idea of possible sexualities. From 13 on, I heard nothing but, you're gay, not my kid, toughen up, take it like a man, you need to work out, etc. Never nurtured my natural talents. I had to give up on his acceptance because it killed my soul. He left my mother for 2 other women, and she was all I had at a pivotal point in my development. This in turn taught me what not to be like, watching her struggle to maintain our unit, trying to cover for both. Expressing our emotions and feelings is a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario. I've accepted damnation and just choose my words carefully. The wrong person to talk to is the wrong person to talk to, period. This is not connected to the act of sharing itself. I think being a man is defined by your actions and balance between strength, physical, emotional, and compassion and understanding, being accountable, and how you deal with your responsibilities. But clearly I'm not an expert on this. Thank you, Leanna. I enjoyed this. I think that the line, the wrong person to talk to is the wrong person to talk to, period. This is not connected to the act of sharing itself. And I just want to add, if you end up talking to the wrong person, this is not your failing. You didn't do anything wrong. Pull up stakes, find another person to talk to. That person could be limited. That person could be not in the right place. But you didn't do anything wrong if you confide in someone and they can't take it, right? As long as you're not abusive, and that's not what's going on here, obviously. That's not on you. And so many people, I think I'm going to end up talking about this a lot, take too much on themselves because if it's their fault, it's within their control. And it is much scarier in a lot of ways when something's not your fault and therefore out of your control. And I mean, the story this commenter told briefly about having to give up on acceptance from his father, I mean, that cuts deep for me. I know that feel. There are certain, unless you're very lucky in terms of the lot you drew with your parents, there's a point in time where you do have to recognize that your parents are just not going to accept parts of you. They don't get it. They don't understand. And that's a hard process that is a loss, and a lot of times you have to grieve it. And that doesn't mean your parents are bad people. In this case, it sounds like his dad, point of privilege, excuse me if I'm wrong, kind of a scumbag. And that's the other thing. I've taken to this mantra of don't sound like the parent you despised and were afraid of growing up. If somebody is not an embodiment of how you want to live your life, if the way someone conducts themselves is something you do not respect, then not only does their opinion mean nothing, but pissing them off and drawing their ire might actually be an indication that you're doing something right. So thank you for sharing, commenter. That was very personal. I think this is the final comment. It strikes me that a whole lot of traditional gender roles is essentially men go out into a brutal world and get beat to hell by it, whether that's an abusive boss, a dangerous job, actual war, or any number of other things. Then the horribly traumatized men comes home to soothing and submissive wives who take whatever lashing they need to do without complaint, and in so doing, sponge up just enough of the men's pain so they can continue to function and go back out into the world for another round of getting beat to hell. Then mainstream pop feminism in response to that is, that's not fair. Women don't have to be soothing and submissive wives or wives at all, and men have no right to lash out and expect women to take it. And in response to that, the manosphere is, but without women doing those things, men will be completely at the world's mercy, have nobody to put us back together when we get beat to hell, and probably die of despair. And none of the major factions seem to be even bringing up the idea of, but why is it okay for the world to beat men to hell like that in the first place? What if it didn't do that? As though the world being like that is simply presumed to be taken as a given because it can't be fixed. But I don't think it does have to be like that. Maybe once it did, and trad makes sense because we lived in huts surrounded by wolves and barbarians and life was nasty, brutish, and short. But things aren't like that anymore in the developed world. And if enough of us expect better, we'll get it. I mean, that was a really raw and honest comment from a particular perspective. And I think it is something, I think comments like this get shut down as, the James Cameron toxic testosterone and toxic masculinity, but I think that's wrong-headed. Because while the comment details, yes, really artificial, brutal traditional gender norms and the trickle down of abuse, the commenter's ultimately saying, what if it didn't have to be like that? And that is where I want to get, at least in microcosm, right? Because I carry around a lot of frustration for the opportunities I was denied because of my gender. And because people just assumed it wasn't the place for a woman. Woman couldn't handle it. A woman wouldn't be accepted doing it. I was held back in television. I was held back in gaming, both as a journalist and a dev, because of this idea that women, men, the traditional role is men are expected to go out and get abused. They can handle it. We can't let a woman go out and take the same shit because she can't handle it. And my attitude was always, look, I can handle, what the nameless, faceless masses say, as long as within the team I have support, right? Like, yeah, make corrections, but don't second guess the way I handle it all the time. And that was just not possible. And what I ended up realizing is that it wasn't even me. And the depersonalization made it even harder. It was, men felt this weird, when I wouldn't allow people to treat me as a poor defenseless victim, the resentment was really shocking. And I realized that everything I did as a woman in gaming was being processed by the men as something about them. And the one guy I won't say that about is what happened to be a conservative, which I don't know if that's correlation or causation. He was a business friendly conservative, not, nationalist cultural conservative. But I'm just throwing it out there one, it wasn't across the board. I'm sure if I think further back, it was less of that. But it was always very frustrating to be girl first, gamer second, when that wasn't, how I perceived it. And I wanted to write about greater themes and things like that. And it's only been within the last, since I started doing my own content, right? That was I could do what I want, and not everything does great, but over time I've been able to develop the ability of don't treat me like a girl first. I don't want that. And if other people do want that, that is fine. And this is the thing about identity. I mentioned earlier in the week that everybody has a different relationship with their identity. To some people, that lens of womanhood is extremely important. And that's fine. Some people want to be protected, like that commenter's wife. And so they see that even in places that are kind of abusive. And that's cool. I just want, women to be able to go, I don't want to be protected. I would prefer to be the protector. And for men to be able to say, I would like some protection in areas of my life, and have that be equal and balanced. Like, I'd love to see characters like Brienne of Tarth represented in media without characters calling her ugly every 5 minutes. Can we have that, please? And then I'd like to have characters that are feminine and warriors, but something realistic about how much time that would take, and what, if you want a female warrior, this is something that would be fun, and I'm giving away the idea, but hey, as long as this can be, I'm happy. If you have a female warrior who is sort of an image, right? She's this image of hope to her people. And so she has to be beautiful and deadly. Have her have a glam squad, right? Like, show that she's got this army of handmaidens who do her hair and do her makeup and pick out her clothes, so she could just, because that's what it's like in TV, right? You show up an hour and a half to 3 hours before you have to be on camera, go, glam squad, do your work. And you sit there and try to conserve as little energy as possible, so that, this is something I had to learn. If you're not careful, you're tired by the minute you step onto set, because you've been in prep for 90 minutes to 3 hours, right? With heat near your head and noise and sound and being poked and prodded and stuff being glued on you and being rubbed at and everything like that, show the realities of that. But you need somebody who knows that experience to be able to bring that truth to the table. And you can tell on these shows and in these stories that it's just not there, right? And I do think that's because at our core, we all have the trad brainworms, right? We're all either succumbing to that or actively living in opposition to it and burning that energy, as we go. And I see it. I'm very open about what my inner voice is. My inner voice is Kratos. And yet, I talk about this a lot just because it's a really easy thing to understand, right? The difference between people forcing me into a box based on gender versus what I'm telling them I'm about. Somebody says my inner voice is Kratos. Do you demand they be nice? Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. They can maybe be nicer. They can be a little less guarded, Kratos, they've defined in Ragnarok as having trust issues. Cool, yeah, sure. And anger. But, do you expect him to be nicey-nicey? No. Well, why would you expect me to be nice? Oh, because girls are nice. Yeah. That's really frustrating to go through life in that box and be forced to conform to that when, maybe if my life had gone a different way, maybe I would have turned out different. But my life went the way it did. And going through waves and waves and waves of abuse makes you tough. And does that mean I don't care about people? No. Does that mean I'm not capable of kindness? No, but I don't see being nice and being kind as the same thing. Being nice is... This is very subjective, and I'm not saying this is the only definition of the word, but being nice to me is an element of dishonesty. Being nice is telling somebody something looks good even though it doesn't. Being nice is being conflict averse, avoiding conflict instead of focusing on healthy conflict. It's kind of two-faced. It's kind of backbitey. To me, nice is dishonest. And that, like I said, that's not going to be the same definition for everybody as nice. That's what it means to me. That's my relationship with it. And that's trauma from girl world, I know. But I do think that the data we see coming out of this gender role stuff, we keep seeing the same stuff over and over and over and over again. Women are much more open-minded as a group than men are to changes in the status quo. And I think that's because we've already had some deconstruction. We've already had some questioning of feminine gender roles, not nearly as much as the questioning of male gender roles. And that's why I think shows like Peacemaker are so important, because it does subvert tough guy tropes, right? It shows the bullshit behind it. And how do I put this? I mean, that's part of the reason I push back against the whole TERF thing so much, right? Because let's face it, they're getting attention, especially media attention in the UK, because the UK still has a unique patriarchy problem. And like literally with the royal family, if there is any male heir, they become king before any woman does. That is literal patriarchy. They only changed the rules for William and Kate's kids, that if George had been born a girl, it would just be firstborn no matter what the gender. But that just changed in our lifetimes. And that trickles down. And so, the reason TERFs are getting such a heightened platform is because they are a useful anomaly in terms of female opinion. If you look at the data, even in the UK, the average woman is actually in favor of loosening of gender roles, of letting trans people, make it easier for trans people to affirm their actual gender identity. They not have problems with trans women in women's spaces, and the conservative powers that be have issues with this. So they are trying through volume, through quality over quantity, trying to make the anomalous opinions seem mainstream. And that's what media does. It normalizes this stuff. But the whole TERF argument is based on that women need private spaces for protection because public spaces are inherently unsafe. And that's the other side of what this commenter is saying, that yes, it's a male space because it's brutal and brutalizing. But does it have to be? Men don't like it. Women don't like it. And we can have all the female single sex spaces we want, and we can have all the rape shelters that we want, and we can have all these hiding places that we want. That doesn't make the public sphere less dangerous. It's not solving the problem. Let's solve the problem. And the problem is attitudinal, right? The problem is what we assume to be normal and what we unintentionally reward, even as we say, oh, men shouldn't hit. Let's teach our boys not to harm women. Well, let's teach our boys not to harm anybody, right? Don't be the aggressor. Don't instigate violence, as one commenter said. But we don't teach that in what we reward. We keep rewarding bullies. We keep rewarding asshole men. We keep giving men in public license to be disasters. And we don't do that by rewarding their behavior. We do it by being neutral on that and punishing women way more for the same transgressions. I'm talking Gina Carano. I'm talking Lindsay Lohan. Just look at the different treatment between Gina Carano and, say, Dave Chappelle, or Gina Carano and Ricky Gervais, right? Gina Carano was much less directly combative, and yet the only job she can get are with the Daily Wire. That's a problem. And, as long as we see assholes getting ahead, men are going to be getting the impression that they need to be assholes to get ahead. And that's why I'm enjoying, Henry Cavill being a mensch about all this stuff with Superman and The Witcher. I'm appreciating seeing James Gunn actively come to the defense of some of these creatives in a difficult time, highlighting their professionalism and being a leader in that regard. Because, James Gunn has his own history with rumors and cancellation, right? And, even though it doesn't work out, he's being a leader about it, and he's eating the shit, not these people. He's actively squashing rumors, and that is honorable behavior. And I do think one of the things I want to do in the coming year with this pivot to more mental health stuff, because I think it's very much needed, is rewarding honor. We have to start actively giving incentives to behave well. Behaving well is not its own reward. It's a war of attrition. I'll talk more about that next week. I will put up a Manly Monday video next week. There's going to be a Manly Monday video. There's going to be a Two Women Talking, because Two Women Talking is pre-recorded, so I might as well do a Wellness Wednesday for next week. But it will be a 'tis the season kind of thing mostly. Anyway, I'm decaying now. Ugh. So let's wrap up. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. I would love the Hanukkah gift of your Patreon support, or a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it. Coffee.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching and have a great weekend.